Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, AI-powered digital signage, transforming retail, venues, and customer experience, presented by TelemetryTV. My name is David Drain, and I'm the show director for Digital Signage Experience, and I'll be your host. Just a few notes before we begin. You can access closed captions from the bottom right corner of the video player. The webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand within 24 hours. We'd love to hear from you, so during the presentation, please submit any questions you have using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. Time permitting, we'll conclude with a Q&A session. And upon conclusion of the webinar, a brief survey, attendee survey, will display on your screen, so please help us out and fill that out. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Manolo Amalgro is Senior Director of Customer Experience and Innovation for Publicis Sapient. And with over 15 years of experience, Manny is a leader in leveraging AI and digital transformation to enhance customer engagement across various sectors. Chris Hillyard is Chief Operating Officer at TelemetryTV. Chris leverages his background in marketing, business development, and strategic alliances to drive exceptional customer experiences and champion the company's growth initiatives. David Title is a partner at Bravo Media, and David leads a creative team that designs and produces immersive, real-time brand experiences driven by his philosophy of come, create, share. All right, so before we begin, we'd like to do an audience poll. So if you would please participate by answering this question: where are you in your AI adoption journey? Have you not started yet? Are you just haven't explored AI at all? Are you exploring? Are you just learning about AI and considering how to implement it? Or would you consider yourself in the early stages, that you've started integrating AI tools, but it's still pretty new? Or would you say you're actively using it? Do you regularly use AI to improve processes and products? Or would you consider yourself advanced, that AI is central to your operations, driving innovation and decision making? All right, we're seeing those poll results change. I'm going to give you another minute to fill out that answer about where you are. Maybe you're thinking about it. Where are you in your AI adoption journey? Have you not started? Are you exploring? Are you in your early stages, actively using, or advanced? All right, let's see those results. Okay, looks like the majority of you, it's a tie between early stages and actively using. Interestingly, and maybe humbly, none of you have chosen the advanced category, but you've got a few folks here who are exploring. I know a lot of people are exploring. So just a couple who haven't gotten started yet. So that's interesting to know kind of where our audience is. So thank you for filling that out. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist. Each of them are going to make some introductory remarks. So I'll begin with Manny, and he's going to level set you on AI and digital signage from where he sits. Manny, take it away.
Great. Thanks, David. Hi, everybody. So what I'm going to do is just kind of give you the top 5 things that you really should be thinking about. I noticed in the poll that everyone's in this early adoption and maybe starting to use AI, but I think it's important to kind of look at just the foundation of things you need to kind of think about while you work through just how you're going to use AI. So the first thing you need to think about is you really need to define the objectives and metrics, right? It sounds like, oh, everyone knows that. But the reality is a lot of people just say, I want to try AI for AI's sake, which is okay. That's an experimentation. But it's really important to think about what you're trying to do and how you're going to measure its success. The second thing you need to really think about, and this is a biggie, is evaluating the data availability and are you ready? Like, think about it this way. Do you have enough data for AI to even work, right? AI needs to look at a lot of data to get some really valuable insights out of it, or to do things like predict things or recommend things. It needs a lot of data. Is your data accessible? Is it in a place that you can get to? A lot of times, most of these enterprises have little pockets of data all over the place. And is it even ready? Do you have to clean your data? It's like laundry. You got to do your laundry first before you can wear this stuff out. So think about that. The next thing you have to think about is your infrastructure. Is your infrastructure ready? Do you have the right tools? Do you have the right test stack? And of course, the design strategy. When you start building things for digital signage, that's going to use AI to do things like assemble it on the fly or change things based on a recommendation engine. You really need to know and have a framework that allows you to have a dynamic template that will adapt to the change. You got to think ahead about what's going to change when the AI takes over. Finally, or almost finally, you have to make sure you have the right expertise and skills. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges we'll all face is AI skill sets are in high demand, and getting those people to be part of your team or hiring them in is going to be a big step. So you have to make sure you have the right expertise. And then finally, ethical and legal compliance, right? Everything you're doing with AI, how has the model been trained? I mean, think about all the challenges that Gen AI faces now when they've basically used the entire internet to train their models, like copyright infringement. All of these details have to be worked out. So you have to think about, has my AI been ethically trained? Am I adhering to the right compliance? Are you using data from your customers to train things? All of these need to be in play, and you have to consider. So hopefully that is a helpful step up as you kind of make your AI journey happen. All right, I'll hand it over to Dave Title.
I think you meant Chris Hillyard. So, hello everyone. I'm Chris Hillyard, COO of TelemetryTV. So, I'm going to be speaking about AI from my experience here at the company and how we're both being aware of it and embracing it. So, December 2022 is kind of when ChatGPT 3.0 came onto the scene. I remember the first feelings were one of excitement, but also anxiety, and I would describe that kind of feeling throughout the company. We're both marveling at this new amazing tool that has kind of come out of, it's feeling like it's come out of nowhere. I know it's been worked on for decades, but it's a really amazing thing. And so we are now in this, I guess, stage of trying to use it on a weekly basis in all our different workflows for the company. It's definitely starting from the back of the company first, behind the scenes in terms of how we do customer support, how we write code. All of our engineering team are now using Cursor AI. We're now looking at AI to generate our content templates using Midjourney or Stable Diffusion. So, I think today I'm going to offer our experience thus far and look to a healthy discussion about how other people are using it, embracing it, and what's coming down the road. So I will hand it off to the next speaker.
And where Manny is really coming and looking at AI from a lot around how it's able to take all sorts of data and then process that into all kinds of actionable outcomes, and how that connects to a lot of what's happening around digital signage and digital display. Bravo traditionally has been involved in the sort of the world of content development and production, along with interactive and responsive design. And so for us in our work around digital signage and digital display, what we're really looking at is what are the opportunities both around development of content strategy and design for digital display, and also content for digital display, especially when we're looking at things like digital display networks that are not primarily being used for advertising solely. So all of these displays that are going up across retail and hospitality and corporate and hospitals and universities, and everyone is putting up displays and everyone is putting up signage, but content needs to fill that. And that the amount of content required to do that is to really do it effectively is an amazing amount of content. And how are we going to be able to help folks to develop, produce, and deliver that sort of content at volume, and what role will AI play in that? So these are, honestly, I just pulled a handful of the tools that we have been using to varying degrees. And I also think it's important when we talk about AI, really we're talking about a whole suite of technologies and software and programming and computing power and all these things that are being used in various ways. So while some things like Runway or Stable Diffusion are really doing generative video and things of that nature, tools like Houdini or Unity or Unreal are doing a lot of things with AI in the background that allow us to do more controlled forms of content creation at volume. So that's a little peek at what we're kind of up to and our angle into the world of AI and digital signage and digital display.
All right. Thank you for that, guys. Appreciate your introductory comments there. We got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to direct this first question to Manny, but of course, anyone can feel free to chime in on it. But Manny, how do you think, how can AI-powered digital signage enhance personalized customer experiences in retail spaces?
Well, I think there's a few ways. I think the ones that I've seen the most bang for their buck, the ones that have been gaining a lot of traction, is using AI in A/B testing and using the data that you're gathering from A/B testing to improve the model so that you can do things like get a bigger ticket lift or get a more relevant message and have it resonate with the people that are viewing the ad. I think there's also looking at ways to, I know that Dave Title was talking about, the tools he's using to generate content with the Gen AI side of things. I think that has a place. I get a little nervous now because it's not something that you or we all can kind of depend on and control as it relates to creating content on the fly. But if it's kind of pulled back into the content supply chain, when you have more control over it, you can do a lot of customization, changing formats, all of that is stuff that used to be very manual and now it can be very automated and save a lot of time and move things along.
Okay. Either one of you want to chime in on that one?
So Manny and I were talking last Friday, and he gave this example of using computer vision through a drive-thru, and basically the computer vision would capture the car, protecting, I guess, the anonymity of the person, but it would actually start profiling the car and building a buyer persona, which I thought was really interesting. And that buyer persona would then, I guess, in real time inform the kiosk or the interactive display where you'd go make your order. So if, for instance, if there was a van that was coming through the drive-thru, the van's highly correlated to a family, and therefore you'd see that that interactive kiosk that you'd put your order through switch to family menu options. So I thought that was really interesting. And then I think for that to happen in real time, Manny, maybe you can speak on that. There's just a ton of additional steps that have to happen very, very quickly using some powerful, compute power, AI, and other technologies to basically make sure that those menu offerings resonate with the people in the van. And also, if it doesn't, how do you calibrate that? So, Manny, I know we talked about that the other day, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, David.
I was just going to say that to your point, Manny, about where AI fits into that sort of content generation and content creation space. We've definitely seen that we're not at a place, and I don't know that we get to a place where everything is a simple prompt generated thing and you get this perfect piece of final content, especially when you get into video and especially as you move into the need to control a lot of different elements. But where we're finding it's already of real value is in some of the background tools that it helps to utilize. So whether that's the method by which we're creating content, the things happening around AI for motion capture and the things happening around AI for the way we can manipulate and control things that we've already created and add those into the pipeline so that it can take advantage of things like this real-time data and then fit into a process that isn't purely, hey, let's just let it make its thing and see what comes out the other side.
One of the areas that we're focusing on as well, and I think is coming down the pipe, is with any digital signage CMS, you'll see those CMSs have large app libraries. They're basically turnkey visual applications to do a certain thing. We believe that in the next year or so, that's all going to be probably custom built very rapidly using AI tools, and therefore you're probably going to start seeing app libraries start to fade away, and people are going to build custom apps for themselves, precisely the way they want it for probably pennies, and then host it on these CMSs to distribute to their screens. So that's probably one of the things that I think, and I'm very excited for in the next year to come.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I also worry about when we talk about, and Dave Title and I had these discussions, like how many GPUs you're going to need on this on the server side to do real time text to video creation. I mean, I was just doing a quick calculation on like the stuff you would see on Sora or Runaway and things like that. It's like the amount of GPU power you need to speed it up is enormous. So I
Yeah,
think we have some hurdles to get over if before we start doing real time text to video generation for digital signage. I don't know what you think, David.
yeah. Well, there's a real, I think there's definitely a perception gap, at least when we talk with people, both around what the real costs of using AI at scale are. Even when we've done, relatively simple things like an AI photo booth, when you're sending off each one of those images to process and be done and sent back, the cost of those is not some negligible thing. That's a real amount of money, and maybe you're only doing a few hundred at an event. But when you talk about scaling these sorts of AI use cases across massive, let's say 5,000 drive-throughs, it really that's a whole other world, and sort of not in my true area of expertise, but is a real consideration, and one that I don't think people really understand the impacts that will have potentially moving forward.
Yep.
Manny, I have to ask you a follow-up question on your drive-through example, which Chris shared. But is that would someone have to opt in to something like that?
No. So, well, I think in general, it's best practice to have some sort of consent, right? But you have to think about these levels of consent. Sometimes they're buried deep within a mobile app. I mean, even with Facebook, they call it implied consent. So when you sign up, you say everything that I share with Meta is fair game. That's literally what you're doing.
Yeah.
So the consent piece, aside from that, if what we try to do is not look at things as people. I know that sounds very insensitive, but the reality is, if you do things like create a persona around the car, as Chris was saying, is like that is cars are marketed to certain types of people, so you're not necessarily looking at the person in the car. Now, I could look at occupancy of the car, which is very helpful. I could say it's one or two people. There's a company I work with, MeldCX, that does a lot of that work, and they can do like a +1, and they have these personas built out about these different types of cars. So you can say, like, if I drive a Tesla or an electric vehicle, I have a certain propensity for making sustainable choices. So you could offer that kind of meal to a person driving that kind of car. But the
There's
reality is, I'm not looking at a license plate. I'm not saying it's a person. Now, that said, a lot of the newer apps that help speed up the drive-through do things like, if you have the mobile app and you place the order, you can self-identify yourself while you're there, which helps greatly, and that's already the consent that they need. I think if you
I'd also
go
say
outside of that, what's that?
I was also going to say that
Yeah.
there's a lot of use cases for some of these the exactly the sorts of things you're trying to solve for that aren't necessarily pure personalization. So if we think about like a retail setting where, I'm trying to use digital display to achieve certain goals like increasing dwell time, or tying it to certain actions or touches or things like that, we can really do that same thing of using computer vision data to be collecting a much more essentially truly anonymous data, which isn't really concerned with your personality, as opposed to the display that's going to look at you and say, oh, you're a man, so I'm going to put up a suit as opposed to a dress. Some of that stuff I'm not convinced is even valuable. But there's all kinds of ways to use AI as a really wonderful advancement in how you're taking, because Manny, I've talked about this all the time. We've been collecting all this data for so many things in so many ways, and the truth is that most of the data being collected by most people doesn't really get used for anything, because up until quite recently, let's say, doing something with that data was hard. It took a lot of work to figure out what to do with it and how to process it and analyze it and all that stuff. One of the things AI is real good at is taking a bunch of data, analyzing it, helping you understand it, and doing something actionable with it. So there's a real, I think, a real advantage within that. And we think about that in helping some of our clients in crafting a digital content strategy. We can take all of this data that you've been collecting and really talk about it and think about how to apply that to the next round of content and the strategy around that and what you're going to do. So I don't think it doesn't necessarily all have to be, hyper personalization use cases. I think there's a lot of broad use case stuff out there as well.
Yeah, I'll just build on what you said. Is that it's very true. The amount of data that is taken in and what's usable, which you find out over time. I mean, that's why you have to start and start experimenting early. When we did our first work in computer vision, the companies I was working with, we were pulling in something like 2 terabytes of data per location. But the reality is we only needed 300 megabytes of that data. Once we understood what was going on, it's kind of you start big and then you start winnowing down the data, and then that's where it becomes usable. And that's basically it. It's like, you got to start now. You have to get a lot of data, like even to get to the level where you're doing things like predicting things are going to happen or predicting a customer behavior. Tons of data need to be processed to understand that. So, just adding that to the fire.
I just
Chris,
want to comment too. Yeah, just back to the drive-through example. So, Manny, you and I talked about too that personalization, right? So once you kind of understand a persona and perhaps the most appropriate offer to give to that patron, following that, there's or trying to get to that offer, it has some sort of workflow has to draw from a repository of media. That's status quo today is typically it's done through automation. It's a human being actually saying, hey, it could go through 1 to 50 different paths of media. If it's this type of person, select path 20 and present this image. Now I think we're moving more towards AI making those decisions. I don't know what that looks like. I'm sure there's more more fuzziness in terms of the logic, but do you see that increasing the quality of the offer? And is there any dangers there that if you hand over that decision making, can you put your company or brand at risk?
I wouldn't say, yeah. David says, I would say, I think that's why you start small and you do pilot tests, right? You don't just release things into the wild. I mean, we all know this, but it's not like you turn it on and say, okay, I trust you, AI, go ahead. You really have to put those guardrails in, but that doesn't happen until you start testing it in the wild, right? I feel like what I've seen is there's a few ways to put the guardrails on. You set up a framework. I mean, even just the template itself, right? If we look at how drive-thru works, is you get presented with a ton of images of products and then descriptions and calorie counts. If you're kind of evolving your thinking, you have to create we call them dynamic templates, but you have to create a place where the AI can inform this template what to show, so that it doesn't just go, willy-nilly and put things where they shouldn't be, right? You kind of create a template, slots for it to go, but it's an open slot. That's why we call it dynamic. And so based on whatever you're kind of driving toward, whatever the decisions need to be made, we'll say, if it's this kind of car, show this kind of offer based on a few different things. You could even do things like, oh, that car and I'm looking at the back of the car and it has some stickers from where this person's kid goes to high school. You could use other details on that to inform this decision engine. But I think as long as you place those guardrails early on and kind of do your learnings first, you could be less at risk. But there's definitely, I would say this, there's definitely a chance, but that's why you do the testing first, right? You try to make it so it's contained within a certain area that is safe for the brand, and it's not necessarily going to show the wrong thing that you don't want to
So,
see.
question for you: in digital signage, there's a massive there's a wide spectrum of users. You got your mom and pops that have their pizza shops, right? They use a couple of displays, and you have large enterprise, perhaps in the thousands of screens. Who is most ripe today to start using AI and embracing it? I assume there's definitely difficulties if you're a small mom and pop. You can't afford the sandbox and the time to create all these workflows. If you're enterprise, it seems like the advantages lean more towards that direction. They have the time, the money, and maybe the expertise to execute these tools. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I mean, when I first started, the discussion is, do you have the right talent in place? Um, I don't think it makes sense for mom and pop places to try the AI. I mean, it depends on how accessible it is. If your platform that you work with has some, built-in AI, templates that you can play around with, or they offer that service that's pre-made. Um, it's probably a better approach. But the reality is, this is the time when a lot of the bigger brands, retailers who can afford it, because there is I wouldn't say substantial, but there's an investment that needs to be made, right? But it's definitely not for, one or two, three stores, mom and pop. You have to really
Where,
make that
where
decision on, is it worth it or not to do that effort, right? What's the cost?
Well, I think where those smaller organizations are going to be seeing and using AI is the way that it is incorporated into those larger services that they're plugged into, so
Yeah.
that that small mom and pop that is up to a because these days you walk into a lot of independent coffee shops and retailers, and they've got a reasonable POS now. It's Square or something else, and it's tied to a decent. Maybe they've even got it tied to their inventory, and there's these simple tools that are getting more widespread, and then AI is going to be in the same way you're going to see it in CMS. You're going to see it in app space, and you're going to see it in whatever the other two or three that end up being the conglomerates that run it. And so small businesses will be using it, and I think if for that reason alone, if you are a small business, you're operating a smaller business, and you're interested in this, it is really a good thing to dive in and start playing around so that you kind of have an understanding of it. But obviously the major integrations and the use cases are going to be on those larger uh, organizations and corporations.
Yeah.
What do you
I
think
also worry
the
about if
cons-
data's
what
available. Yeah. Sorry. Go
what's the
ahead.
consequence? What's the consequence to being a laggard in this new era of AI? What happens if you don't adopt? Are there negative consequences?
Yeah, I think that your competition, again, we'll table it at, is if you're a mom and pop, you really have to do your is it the juice worth the squeeze? That's the term. If that's the case, and you have, let's say, some investment money that you want to apply, then cool. But I think that if you look at it's a very competitive market in QSR, especially now. I mean, you can see even McDonald's got in trouble because they were getting too expensive, right? All of those situations are causing a lot more focus on how do I squeeze the most revenue or revenue management from my platforms. I think that if you're not experimenting and innovating with AI now, you are definitely going to be left behind, because your competition, you got to know that they're already looking at it. And just based on what I've seen in the industry, a lot of the big brands are definitely deep in AI right now.
But back to what
David,
Manny said at the very beginning, really thinking about why you're, regardless of how big you are, and yes, everyone is doing it, and if you're not, you're probably in trouble. But really thinking about is the first thing that Manny put up on his introduction about really thinking through the whys and the what are you trying to do with it and why are you trying to do that, because that's going to help guide you more than anything else. And again, it's that, you said it's that obvious thing, but I think it gets overlooked. I think people race in and try to start, this is the new thing, I got to be in it, I got to do all this stuff, and overspend and often don't succeed, and it's because they're skipping that really important first step.
So
As
I
a
guess
content,
question. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask a follow up to David. As a content creator, is there some concern that people are just going to generate content on their own and not need a firm such as yourself?
Uh, you know, our feeling is it's kind of the same as it's been from our early days, in the early 2000s when we were making the world's first explainer videos for companies, and people, started to say, "Hey, I've got Final Cut, or I've got iMovie, and I've got I can, the doing of these things, and both having the ideas and the strategy and then the right skill set to actually develop and produce consistently the kind of content needed for these sorts of outcomes, I don't think is ever going to become one of these fully automated things. I think portions of it will be, uh, but there are going to be large areas of the digital display world that are going to require a hybrid of skills that are not going to be, you hand it off to your IT department to manage your content for the next round.
Has AI made your job easier or harder?
Uh, I don't think it's made it. It's certainly not made it any harder. Uh, aside from uh, it's from a lot of our work outside of digital displays around working with clients and developing experiences, whether it's corporate experience centers or activations or things. And a lot of our clients want to be able to demonstrate a connection to AI and a use of AI and to be connected to AI. And it's really fascinating to uh, try to facilitate those requests and to understand, we're trying to use AI every day right now in public with people and trying to manage what the realities of that are and what those interactions look like. And we're learning a lot from that and being able to apply a lot of those lessons to each new round. And we're very transparent with all of our clients that this is this, really brave new world. And it's great if you want to be involved and you want to get into it and you want to start bringing it out into the world. We're going to do that, but you have to understand both what the risks are and what the limitations are of that, and then we can go play and see what happens. So that's a lot of fun.
All right, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and dive into a couple of those because I think there's some interesting stuff here. So, first question we have is are there any leading technologies that you are seeing in the market to drive measurement, calibration, and overall analytics, and pros and cons?
I could start with that one. I think definitely it's top of mind, especially in the retail media space, right? The folks that are, especially in store. I think the key, and AI plays a huge role there because it's doing the pattern analysis. It's helping sift through all of that data that's being collected. But I think there's a few different kinds of measurement instrumentation, from RF to Wi-Fi sensing and device sensing. There's a whole gamut all the way up to computer vision, right? You can see the level of a, let's say, granularity that has to be captured, as well as there's a fine line that advertisers are looking for as it relates to um, let's say predictive versus deterministic types of measurement that's happening. um, but I think that when I look at the broader sense, there's a lot of great technologies that are out there that are being used and applied in the retail media measurement space that are continuing to grow. Right? There's I'd say one of the companies I've seen is like Fast Sensor. Another one is Blue Zoo. I mentioned another one, which is MailCX. Um, there's also, every digital signage platform has its own measurement integration. I mean, Stratacache has Walkbase, Navori has their own sensor system. Like, they're merging together. It's part and parcel of what's required for, especially in the retail media space that's exploding right now. I think the key here is just finding that right spot, because you have to, again, you can't necessarily instrument every single one of your stores. That's just not sustainable. But you can get to that specific number, 20, 30%. I'm making that number up. It depends on what level of statistical significance you need. But these measurement platforms are in there, and AI is part and parcel of how they're sifting through the pattern recognition, going through all the different data and processing it so that it can be shared to whatever platform that the retailer is using to kind of prove to the advertisers that their campaigns are being successful. So that answers the question.
I just want to comment too on just analytics. So that example you used is basically to monitor analytics in the environment where your audience is, right? And to understand the audience better and all the signals they're giving off. There's also analytics that are used on the back end. One of the areas that we're focusing on is we have large clients with thousands of endpoints, and network health is typically, a core person's job, or a team of people, and their job is to basically look at all these thousands of devices, the hardware that they're on. Are those devices healthy? Are they spitting out errors? Is their cache full? Are they restarting? There's just a ton of different issues when you're managing thousands of endpoints across different platforms. And we're now seeing that AI can do, large data analysis in real time. It can do anomaly detection. It can actually predict the health of your network and remedy it, in real time by having like trailing workflows that follow it. So the network administrator is going to get a ton more help now with AI coming into the fold.
Okay. All right. David, unless you want to comment on that, I'll move on. All right. Cool. So there's a question about content creation and the ability to create a large amount of content for a lesser cost. And the question is, couldn't you parameter it properly to limit the range to a controllable output that keeps content fresh without it being unpredictable?
I think the answer to that is sorta, kinda, but the truth is there's a lot of tools, and it's really a mix of tools. And again, AI gets used as this really big umbrella term to describe a whole lot of things. That some of which is really machine learning, some of it is uh, just good old algorithmic programming. There's all kinds of stuff going on under that AI umbrella, and all these tools that are already being used and have been used to help generate variations on content, around themes of content. And I think we'll see more and more of that, of AI being used in that process. But we really have to, there's around the sort of all the questions about use rights and everything else, understanding how the models that you're using to generate that stuff and how they're built and trained is really a big piece of that. And then, being able to control things to a degree that provides the feedback that you need from all those iterations.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment? All right, a question for all of you. So what are the areas where people should be cautious when it comes to generative AI? So we touched on it a little bit, just like to dive into that a little bit deeper.
One of the prime, like you heard this example a couple months back, Ford, I think, put customer support on full AI, and someone tricked the AI into giving them away a free car. So, and then they had to plug that all through, legal MSA and basically plug that all with paperwork after. But there is, if you give AI autonomy to make critical executive decisions on the behalf of your brand and company, there's obviously risks there. So those are definitely the negative. It's how do you protect yourself against that, and how do you foresee things, because there's things called the unknown unknowns. How do you protect what you don't know about? I don't know if Manny or Dave, you've encountered
Yeah,
any of
I
those
mean,
real events,
the
but
reality is, the reality is the cases have not yet gone to court, and boy will they. And I know some of them are making their way in now, and there's going to be so many more when it comes to the generative AI side. Although I'm fascinated, and I don't know nearly as much about, how some of these other models, what data these models are using to build these predictive generative AI, uh, whose information everything is being built on data that was originally created by humans, although now it's becoming a bit of a recursive thing, which ain't good. But the generative stuff, we honestly, it's an open question right now, and so we have some clients that are very risk averse, and they are using AI only in ways where we are building custom models. It is in a completely closed box, and we can point to every piece of data that was used and how it was sourced, and we have other clients that are excited and ready to use raw mid-journey images as part of a campaign, and
That's crazy.
it's already
I
happening. And believe me,
Yeah,
if you
that's
don't
a
think
no-no.
if you
Don't
don't
do
think
that.
that's already happening, you know
well,
the in the commercial advertising world, especially on the lower end of the market, if you're online and you haven't put an ad blocker in, a large percentage of what you're seeing is AI generated.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would just build on that and say, yeah, if there's any question about that and that your client is concerned, then just you stay away, right? The jury's literally the jury's still out. No one knows where these things are going to go. I mean, I think the challenge is going to, unfortunately, the burden of proof may lay on the creators that are saying their work was trained without their permission or used in the training of the models, but how can you prove that? That's definitely going to be on them to show. So I'm not saying go ahead and use Gen AI because they'll never be able to prove or get through the lawsuit. I'm just saying there's a lot of um, things that have to happen for this to kind of change the direction things are going. I think the again, another metaphor, the genie's out of the bottle. It's already happening, and
Hmm.
to the point David said, people are already. It's all over social media. People are already using Gen AI images for their content, even for
um,
podcasts. My friend David Title sent me a podcast that was created with Gen AI based
Right.
on things he told it. It's just crazy the things that it can do. But the one thing that's interesting I saw was there's a company, not a company, but there's a platform called a tool called Nightshade, which is what the University of Chicago put out. It's like open source; people can use it, and it's for creators. And it basically poisons your image. Not makes it look like bad, but it makes the data not usable for model training, so they won't be able to train a model based on your style of images. So there's
so
kind of
equivalent of a
another
watermark or
direction things
something
are
like that.
going. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the negatives I've heard so far are basically copyright infringement. So if you're producing content and it's the likeness of a celebrity that hasn't given consent, or some sort of copyright that maybe is emulating a brand that as well hasn't given you consent, that puts you in that danger zone. So I'm not familiar with working with the guardrails. If you guys are, I'd love to hear your 2 cents on how do you put up the guardrails? How do you put these safety boxes up so you don't have those risk events?
Well,
Well,
I
I mean,
think
in our
David.
case,
Good.
we build our own models.
Yeah.
We build and train our own models for specific use cases. If the client wants us, if we're going to incorporate AI into a process that's got a generative element to it, then we will build those models, and we will use only resources that are either internal and our own to train on, or public domain or otherwise, licensed.
Yep. But
And
they call
also,
it
like
synthetic
Adobe
data.
Firefly, for instance, at least claims to be an ethical resource. And I know that some brands are now finding themselves open to using that based on Adobe's assurances that everything it's trained on is, uh, cleared in some way.
Yeah. A lot
And
of
I
the
think we'll see
stock
more
photo
of that.
places.
Yeah, more of that sort of resources, better and better resources that at least are claiming that they've got all of this in an ethical manner. But again, as Manny said, the court cases have not happened yet. So we always tell our clients that we're not lawyers, otherwise we charge more.
That's right.
All right. Another audience question here, and I don't know if you guys can answer this, but I'll throw it out there. It says, what are the risks of using a third-party provider like OpenAI to review and analyze your data versus having a custom solution built specifically for your company that is hosted internally?
Well, I'll start with they give you can have your own personal OpenAI ChatGPT. Like a lot of the corporations use it. Every big corporation uses it. That's basically the guardrails. It's a giant sandbox that's closed off, and everything you put in there will never be used outside of that or used to train other models. Right. That's basically the number one thing is you work with a reputable platform, and every platform has their own, will issue you your own version or your flavor that you can use internally for your corporation or your enterprise. So I'd say that's
These are the
the first.
paid versions, I guess.
Yes.
Well, no, no,
Well,
no. Beware. Beware. If you are you just like the subscription model ChatGPT, as far as I understand it, what you're putting in is trainable data. Uh, Even if you're using the paid version of it, that's very different than what Manny's talking about, which is building a basically a replica of ChatGPT locally, so that none of your data goes back out to the main model that trains the chat GPT that everybody uses on their computer or their phone.
yep. But if you use any Meta products or TikTok or anything like that, too late. They're already using it for sure.
LinkedIn,
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 Reddit.
yeah, anything you post is being used to train models.
So it starts to again that accuracy of verification. How do we verify that the data coming back is accurate if it's trained off of some person's opinion on Reddit?
Very true. I mean, what was that incident where someone was talking about how to make a pizza recipe, and in the pizza recipe, because there was a subreddit or somebody was talking about it on, um, they, they said, "Oh, use glue." Like they basically made a comment which surfaced it in a response that somebody had in one of these types of
Oh wow.
interactions with chat. It wasn't ChatGPT; it was
They
Google.
they troll they trolled the AI or and the AI bit. Is that
Not
what happened?
you don't have to troll the AI. The AI is being trained on us, and we're all a bunch of trolls. And
Speak for
especially if
yourself, David.
you're using Reddit comments. Um, Although I actually find Reddit comments to be one of the best comment pools out there. But I do think, one of the reasons why a lot of the real use of AI right now that isn't as sexy or fun to talk about is the back office stuff that people are using AI for. It's all the
Absolutely.
data analysis, it's the summarizing, it's all this other background stuff that AI is really good at doing, and is a really useful tool and has all of these real world use cases for. And if you're in and if you're in a role that requires a lot of data analysis, or you're in a role that requires, managing a lot of these endpoints, like you're saying, network administrators and whatever, all of these places are really where AI is actually happening. This all the Gen AI stuff and all of that is definitely the face, and it's interesting, and it plays a role. But as back to when what Manny was talking about at the very beginning was really using AI in the background, much more so than its use cases in front of house.
Yeah,
All right. So,
I'm definitely seeing it basically help with the back end of kind of the boring administrative rote work that is necessary to keep the organization running. It's definitely helping there. And you could argue freeing up resources to be more creative at the
Yep.
forefront
Yeah.
of the company. Yeah.
all right. So the question came in about, is there any actual solid case studies that are out there now? Are we still so early in the stages that we're not able to even report on those examples out in the wild?
I think there are case studies specific to digital signage. I don't think that there's anything out there that, because that's a competitive thing, right? Showing how they're doing it and leveraging AI. Um, I wouldn't say there's case studies that are published, but there are stories, and um, the market itself. I mean, you could see if you look at once in a while there'll be an article about how voice AI is transforming the drive-through. I think it is. I think it has a huge impact, even from the standpoint of how you think about digital signage, because the way that it can translate is, think about a drive-through. You see everything that is being sold to you. Like every product has to be shown because it's a menu, and that can get really confusing. But if with a voice AI applied the right way, you could drive up and ask it to show me all the low-cal desserts, or based on what you know about me, you don't even have to say it. You check in with your loyalty app, it knows what your previous orders have been, and it can tell based on what you order what kind of flavor profile you like, that it could show you just those things, and you don't have to see the rest of the menu board, right? That in itself is going to transform the industry,
You
because
could
you have to think differently about how you have these interfaces working.
you could give the drive-through person a bunch of buttons to push, and you could say, "Hey, could you show me the drink menu?" And they could just push that button.
Yeah. Depends how long your arms are, if
I
you're an
guess. I don't know.
SUV.
Great. Those screens are
No,
not
no,
not
no. I'm
reachable.
saying if you had a live drive-through person instead of an AI, I could ask the live drive-through person to show me some options. It's
Oh,
interesting.
That's
okay. So
true.
it'd be assisted
You
What's
could.
selling, huh?
interesting is that hasn't sprung up as an idea, but that's interesting to me, and I wonder if there was real value in me being able to drive up and say, "Hey, listen, I'm really interested in hamburgers," or do people not have the impulse to do that, and that's why no one ever has done it, and that's why no one's built a service around it? Is this developing a service for a problem that didn't exist?
I think if you look at the trend in people trying to use less workers in as crew, that this might be why. Like it's an operational thing. I mean, it's a good point. Again, that's your
I get
cost
that. I'm
benefit.
just
Is
curious about like that specific use case is interesting to me because it was never tested in a non AI setting where it would be easily implementable. Uh,
would it though? Is
sure.
it that easy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would challenge that it's not easier. I mean, you definitely have to build some sort of framework around it, and then you have to these physical buttons and that. I mean, POS itself is that, right? You could actually, as you're checking in today, when people ring up your order, it changes. I mean, you're only getting your order confirmation, but it's
Yeah.
the same approach. So yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it's possible.
I don't know. It's always interesting to me about the way, we try to implement technology and what, again, back to the same thing. What are we trying to do with the technology
Right.
uh, and which things have real value and which things are more like, uh, hey, look what I can do with technology, but did it solve a problem?
It's a good point.
Is
Or maybe
AI
don't rush to AI to solve everything.
uh, is
Not
the
yet.
AI skill set something you guys are going to be looking at when you're hiring?
Oh, are you saying
Sorry,
is
say that
AI?
again one more time.
Yeah.
I'm basically saying, is it going to change the way you hire people, perhaps in development or any of these areas, are you going to be asking about their experience with AI and be hiring for that, hiring the person who has the most experience using AI?
In development, for sure. I think that's critical, right? I think having the experience of working with whatever platform of choice that you have, you definitely have to have those skills. I think you're competing with everybody else that's looking for those skills. That's the harder part. Is like everybody wants an AI person, a data scientist now too, right? There's a lot of these jobs that I would say weren't necessarily core to pro AV that are now becoming that way. If you have background in machine learning and AI and the newer tools that are out there, it's definitely going to be um, an important skill to have. I mean, I guess I should say this way: you definitely should have some sort of skill or start learning that type of thing, depending on what role you're going to play. Um, I don't see it changing. I think that's just the way it is. AI is going to be in everything. It's just what I'd say it starts in software development first, for sure.
I'm seeing it across all roles and functions, basically. I think, yeah, the quality and mindset of that person has to be curious, has to be hungry and willing to try out and experiment with all these tools. When we hire people, it's definitely if you're leaning that direction and you're curious and you're rapidly testing things out, that's the kind of mindset and person we look for. So someone that's more status quo and maybe hesitant or reluctant to even attempt to try the tools is probably someone that goes on the bottom part of the list when we're hiring. So definitely, I think right now, I mean, all the tools are so new and nascent. No one's really developed a deep expertise. It's more about how quickly can you adopt and how curious and hungry are you to adopt. So I think that's what we look for.
Yeah, I agree. It's not like, nobody's going to be able to show me something on a a resume or a cover letter that demonstrates expertise in this thing. We're so new into it, and so on the development side, which is where we use a lot of this in other parts of our business, uh, it's a given almost that the folks we're looking at are using and exploring AI because it's an active tool in everything they're doing. And as we get into some of the other roles here, it's back to the same thing that Chris is saying, that people that are interested and curious are going to be more interesting to us than people that aren't.
Okay, final questions. This is like our lightning round. For the audience members who have indicated that they're just in the early stages, what steps would you recommend they take? What to go to the next level?
I'd say everyone has to start with getting some of the basic tools, which is basically GPT or Gemini. Start using one of those popular LLMs and just start asking it questions. If you don't know where to go next, ask it a question. It's probably, I remember in the old days was if you hadn't asked Google, then don't bother me. Now it should be about if you haven't asked the GPT. That should be your first kind of instinctual response to anything that you're approaching is. Ask it a question. It's like basically today it's a really smart PhD professor, so it can give you some great direction. I would start with one of those tools, which will inform subsequent tools, and then also pay attention to communities that are using the tools. There's a ton of communities out there. Start with YouTube. Go watch how people are using the tools. You'll see a ton of chatter on all the videos, and experts will talk about how they're using it or how they did X, Y, Z. Just pay attention to that. A lot of the chatter too is happening on X, formerly known as Twitter. There's just a ton of influencers on there as well. So pay attention to that platform.
I would say pick a problem, pick something you want to try to do, and then start with any one of these tools as a starting point and see where it takes you to try to apply AI to this thing I'm trying to do, and see where that leads you, because it really is more interesting to use it as a tool than although just playing with it is a lot of fun too. And if you haven't used the new voice interactive elements of ChatGPT, it is both fascinating and deeply, deeply disturbing.
Right. And I'll just say, I think I would always say start with your data. Look at the data sets that you have. Are they ready to even be used in with AI? I think there's also, as Chris is saying, the thing about these prompt engineering approaches is you definitely need to tell these Gen AI platforms what you want it to do. You have to think about it from the standpoint of start with a persona when you talk to it. Say, I want you to tell me more about this, and tell me if I was this kind of person, a marketer, a C-level executive, like giving it more detail for the output. You can even tell it to ask you more questions until it's ready to give you the answer, and you will get a much, much, much better result. So it's basically model training in its smallest form. So, and don't buy any of those prompt engineering deals, right? Everything is accessible for free. Just do enough searches online and you'll find it. I mean, TikTok is a great place. They have a ton of influencers there that give you a daily, tip on how to use different types of AI and approach it. But I think it's critical. AI is not going to, you get what you put into it, is what I think the way to look at it is. The more detail you give it, the better you train it, the better the output that comes out of it.
All right. Well, we're out of time. Boy, that hour just went really fast. And I wanted to thank all my panelists. So thank you, Manny. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I know you can get in touch with any one of us. You can find us on LinkedIn. And if you want to continue the conversation, thank you as an audience for participating. Great questions. I know we couldn't get to all of them, but we have your questions. And so there'll be some follow up. And I want to thank TelemetryTV for sponsoring. Please go check them out at TelemetryTV.com. And I want to last encourage everyone to come join us at Digital Signage Experience in Las Vegas coming up in about 6 weeks. So go to www.digitalsignageexperience.com and use the code webinar and grab yourself a free expo pass. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time.